You know what API I really wish I had? Actually, it doesn't really matter. I could sit here and wish, or I could just build my own. That's what we're going to do today. We'll build an API for Throne of Glass using Node Express, TypeScript, PlanetScale, and whatever else we'll need. Let's get into it. What's up, everyone? My name is James T. Quick, and I do weekly videos about web development. I haven't done as much like actual coding stuff recently, so I wanted to take some time to do that. So one of my favorite books that I've read in the last year, it's a book series. It's one of my favorite series of all time, is Throne of Glass. One of my students introduced this to me. If you're interested in kind of fantasy stuff, you should go check it out. I think it's amazing. And I like to tie in like Harry Potter and Pokemon and things like that into my demos. And I thought, why don't I create an API for Throne of Glass characters, which I thought would be fun. There isn't one that already exists, so what I and you are going to have to do is actually web scrape. So we're going to grab the information from the wiki page for Throne of Glass. We're going to grab all the characters and their images and their species, and that's basically it, like a couple pieces of basic information. We will upload those to a database in PlanetScale. So I recently started working at PlanetScale, and this is one of my ways to start experimenting and working with PlanetScale. It's been pretty cool. I think you'll enjoy it as well. If you want more cool tutorials like this and you want to check out new updates for PlanetScale, make sure to follow us on Twitter at PlanetScale Data. So we'll put all the data in PlanetScale, and then we'll set up a Node Express app with TypeScript to be able to get it all together, which is pretty cool, I think. All right, so for you to get started, or actually to have for reference, I've got a GitHub repository that I'll put a link below for you to have access to this. So inside of here, you'll see the Throne of Glass API. I don't have a README yet, but we should have some code here in a second after I push that up and refresh. There we go, cool. So inside of source, you can see all the source files and stuff like that. Anyway, let's go ahead and start to set this thing up. So I'm inside of VS Code, and I'm going to create a directory inside of my delete me folder, which is just for like demos and stuff for videos. And I'm going to create the Throne of Glass API folder. And then I'm going to open that folder inside of VS Code by using code-r and then Throne of Glass API. So it'll open that thing up for me. And then we'll want to initialize this as a JavaScript project. So we'll do npm init -y. If we can spell this correctly, npm, not npm. So that should go ahead and initialize this thing as a project here that we care about. And then from here, I'm going to create an app.ts. So again, we're going to do this in TypeScript. I'm not a TypeScript expert. So actually, if you are a TypeScript expert, I'd love to know what tips and tricks you have for me as we go through this. But we'll do some of the basic stuff here. And actually, I want this to be inside of a source directory. So we'll put the app.ts inside of a source directory. And we're going to have a lot of different packages in here that we are going to install. So let's kind of take this one step at a time. We're going to need a few different things related to TypeScript. So inside of our dev dependencies, so -- save dev, we're going to install TypeScript. We'll do TS node as well. And eventually we'll need several types for different things. In the final project, you will see that I've got ESLint configured and stuff like that. We won't necessarily get into that now. So we'll just kind of stick with these basics. So we're going to need TypeScript. We're going to need TS node. And I think that will be, also Nodemon. So we'll need Nodemon in there. And that will probably be good enough for now. So let's go ahead and not do dry run, but let's go ahead and install that. And then once those are installed, we should see them show up inside of our directory in here. Let's see. Oh, misspelled TypeScript, type E script. Cool. So that hopefully we'll go ahead and install, and we'll see those dependencies inside of our dev dependencies. Nodemon is a package that allows you to do kind of a live reloading server. Every time you save your code, it'll reload it for you, which is pretty nice. So inside of scripts, we're going to have a few different ones in here. So we're going to have one for dev. So in dev, I like to run that Nodemon command. So I will run Nodemon, and then we'll go into source and then app.ts. So we'll just run that right from the source. All right, so then we'll have a TS build. So we'll do a build of our TypeScript. And inside of here, we're going to remove all of the directories at slash dist, or everything in dist, and then run tsc. So that will basically recompile the TypeScript. We'll add the TypeScript config file in here in a second, and then output that into dist. So that's what that should do. We'll have a pre-start. So before we run npm run start, we'll want to make sure that we do an npm run of ts build. So before we start our application, we want to make sure that we build it first, so that when we run start, it can call dist/app.js. So notice that our app.ts, our TypeScript file, is in source. Then we're going to run our build, which will build it into our dist folder. We'll see that in a second. And then when we actually run start, it will run it from the dist folder. While we're in dev, though, it's just going to run from the source with Nodemon. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, now one thing that we will need is a TypeScript tsconfig JSON file. And there will be a few things in here. We won't cover them all, but the biggest thing here is the output directory. So when we run a TypeScript build, where are we actually putting those files? We're putting them in /dist. Where do we get the root files from? We get them from /source. Our target is ES5. And then we've got a couple of different parameters down here that you could mess with. We're going to build everything that's inside of our source directory, and we're not going to build anything that is in node modules or is a test file. Cool. So that ought to be the basics. And hopefully, let's go ahead and actually run. So let's do just a log here to see if this is working. So we can say hello world. And then we can do two things. We can run our npm run dev. So that should run this with Nodemon. So if you see the hello world, and then if I say add an exclamation and save, it restarts for us. So that actually is really nice. So the start is running, or the dev is running. And then let's try a ts build from our package.json file. Is this thing? All right, so inside of here, it is ts build. So let's do npm run and then ts:/build. Hopefully what we'll see is that actually runs through and builds our code. And I don't think it's recognizing our tsconfig file, I think is what that is saying. And that's because this is not supposed to be in the source directory. It's supposed to be in the root directory. So now with that in place, if we run this build again, hopefully we'll see that this actually ran our build. It put the stuff in dist, and then we could, if we did an npm run start, it'll actually run that build again. And then it will start the app from our app.js, and then it runs hello world. So that actually works the way we expect it to, which is perfect. So let's go ahead and start to work with Express. So we'll set up kind of a dummy endpoint. We'll save the actual web scraping of this for the end. So if you want to stick around to see how we actually get all that data with web scraping and Cheerio and Axios and stuff like that, stick around to the end for that. But inside of here, now we want to install our dependencies that are relevant to Express. So we're going to install Express, and then we're also going to install types Express. So a lot of working with TypeScript now is getting your packages for the actual types themselves. So we'll also have this for Node. So we'll have types Node, and actually some of these will be in dev dependencies. So let's stop. Let's just install Express and Axios and Cheerio and .env, and we already have Express, and then MySQL. So let's start with those. So Express is going to be the framework that we use. Axios is the thing that we use to make fetch requests. Cheerio is the thing that we use to scrape the actual HTML that comes back. .env allows us to use environment variables, and then MySQL is the package that we're going to use to connect to PlanetScale. So we'll install all of those, and those are regular dependencies. And then we'll also install save dev. Now we'll do our types. So we'll have types for Express. We'll have types for Node. And we'll have types for, let's see which other ones I have. I think Node Express. Node Express, is that the only ones that I have? That may be it. Okay, we'll just stick with those then, Node and Express. All right, those are in place. Now let's go into our app.ts file and start to stub out this basic application. So we want to import Express and then a couple of other things. So the request, if I can get my capitals right, request and response from Express. Let's actually fix the There we go. And notice now if we hover on these, this should show you what exactly this type of object is because we were importing those actual objects and we have the types for them. We're not going to use this just yet, but we'll import MySQL from MySQL, and we'll have to set up that PlanetScale database here in a minute. And let's make sure, did we install MySQL? Did we get that as one of our dependencies? Looks like we have that right there. And we might have missed, looks like we can install the types for MySQL as well. So let's do install save dev types MySQL. Let's go ahead and grab those. And then that error goes away because it now knows what should be coming back from that. Instead of just letting it be any in TypeScript, now it knows it's going to be whatever it returns from this. Let's look at this. What is this return? Is it actually going to show us what type that is? Anyway. All right, so we have that. Now let's go ahead and create our app. So we'll say app is new express, and then we'll get a port. So we'll say port equals either process.env.port or 3000. And then we'll call app.listen at that port. And then have a callback function to say app is running. And actually, this is not a new express. It's just calling the express constructor or the express function there. So we create our app, then we listen for it. So if we save this and now do npm run dev, this should start with that live reloading server. If I save, it runs again. And now we've got our actual server running. So what we want is, I want to have two different endpoints in here. You can see this, I think, at this tab is open here. Two different endpoints. One is API/characters, which will list off all the characters, and then you'll have a /ID, which is where you could get a character by its ID. So let's go ahead and stub those out. We'll have app.get API/characters. And then inside of here, we'll pass in our parameters of request is the first one. And then response is the second one. And then we'll have our arrow function here. And what do we want to return? Well, for now, we can just send back it works. All right. And then we'll have almost the same thing, but we'll have an ID in the path. So if we do our ID here, and then we need to get that ID programmatically, so we can grab that from the path, and this should be a /ID. But we can get that from request.params or rec.params, and get it from rec.params.id. All right, so that should get us that, and then we could just pass this in. Something like that, just so we can see it. So this should be running. Hopefully now, if we try our dummy endpoint, it says it works. And if we do an ID of 1, it says it works for ID of 1 as well. So that's cool. So we've got those stubbed out. Now we need to actually create our database. So we're going to use PlanetScale as our database, and you can sign up for an account for free. What I'm going to do is actually use the CLI. So you can go to the CLI after you signed up for a free account. You can download the CLI, and then we'll kind of follow the instructions. I'll include a link to this that are in the connected Node.js app to create a database and then start to work with it there. So I'm going to stop my my app here, and then we'll say pscale database create, and then I'm going to call this just TOG for Throne of Glass, and to be something a little bit shorter. So I'm going to create that. Hey, that thing was created for me. If we go and look inside of the actual dashboard, the GUI, you should see that I've created TOG. It doesn't have any data in it or anything like that, which is okay. Now, PlanetScale has this interesting way to manage your database as if it's code using branches and things. So if we go into this database in the dashboard and go into branches, we'll see that it creates a main branch for us by default. But that main branch is actually not a production branch. It's created as a development branch by default. So if I click into this, there's a button here to promote this branch, promote a branch to production. So I'm going to go ahead and promote that branch so we can promote this. And now we've got a production branch called main that's in production, but it has no schema. We'll see this inside of schema. If we click on this, it has nothing there. But then we can actually create a branch from that so we can experiment and stuff there. So I'm going to create a new branch from main and call this dev and go ahead and create this. So it's going to make a copy of any schema that's in the main one if there were schemas there. And it's going to create a new branch with its very own separate database. This allows us to isolate the data that we're working with by working just in the dev branch. And then I am going to work with this app called ArcType. So ArcType you can download for Mac. I don't know if this is on Windows or not. Let's actually double check here. All right, looks like this is only for Mac, which actually I think is a reason for us to not do this so I don't exclude anyone. So let's go back to our dashboard. We'll go into the GUI here. We have our database and we have our branch. Let's go into the console and we can actually type into the console what our schema is right here. All right, so I'm going to just paste this in, and I will include this in the source code for this, so you can have access to this as well, and you can just pass it in. But inside of the console, inside of my dev branch, I'm going to create a table for characters, and this is going to have. We need to end this with a semicolon. This is going to have an ID that can't be null. We'll have a name, we'll have species, and we'll have an image. So just a couple of strings, a couple of basic pieces of information in here. So after that's done, then if I load up the schema. And refresh this just to make sure I have the latest one. It should show that, hey, there's the actual schema that I have, and now I can start to work with this. Now inside of the console, I could also insert a piece of data here as well. And just looking at the docs, in case you need a reference for this later on, the connect Node.js, you have a link to this as well. You can see an example of that there. But I am going to run an insert into, and I'm going to insert it into my characters table. And then we'll have the ID, the name, the species, and the image. All right, so we're going to insert into characters, and then we say which columns we're going to insert into. And now we need to pass in our values. So we'll pass that in this values argument. And we'll say the ID is going to be 1, the name is going to be James, the species is cool, obviously. And then the image is, we'll just put some dummy text in there. I just want to see that this actually works. So let's try to run this insert. Looks like it completed. Now if we select star from characters, hopefully we'll see that I have a character. I forgot the semicolon inside of here. So there's our character. So this is working. So now we can start to reference this material, this content from our actual application. So this is where the MySQL comes in. So what we'll do is at the beginning of this, we will create a query. We'll say that the query is basically what we just wrote. We'll do select star from characters. So that's going to be the query string. And now we need to actually execute this query string. So to do this, we need to set up some sort of connection to this database. So we will, after we've got our app here, we can create a connection string. And you could either load this from environment variables. Actually, we will load this from environment variables, although not manually. We'll see in a second. I will say this is going to come from the database URL or just an empty string. So database URL will be an environment variable that we'll see in a second. And then we'll create a connection. So we'll say, we'll take our MySQL client and we'll call create connection and we'll pass in that connection string. All right. And then now that we have the connection, we'll go ahead and actually connect. So connection.connect. So that's all the kind of the boilerplate stuff here. And then inside of our application to actually use this, we can call our connection dot query and then pass in that query. And it's going to return back to us either an error or rows. And then we can do what we want with it. So we can say if there's an error, throw the error. Otherwise, we can return or return res.send of rows, so we can actually return that data back for our API. So let's get rid of this one, and that should do it. So the only thing that we're missing here is actually getting this database URL into our environment variables. Now we could create a .env file, and we could add that database URL connection string in here. And there's instructions in this doc to do this if you'd like to do it this way. You basically have to create a new password inside of, actually do it from the terminal or from the GUI. And you have to create a password based on the branch that you're on. So we're on the dev branch, but instead we can actually do this right in line with the CLI from PlanetScale. So we can say pscale connect, and then we say which database are we connecting to? We're connecting to TOG, and then which branch we're connecting to the dev branch. And then we can do -- execute, and then single quotes a command that we want to run. In this case, it's npm run dev. Now, what does all that mean? Well, we're going to connect to this database at that specific branch. And then by calling execute, it's actually going to pass in the URL for the connection string for the database into whatever command we run as the environment variable of database URL. So we don't have to go and create that thing ourselves. We don't have to type it into the .env. It's just going to be there. So let's give this a shot and see if this will run. All right, so it connected to our database. It has kind of a local proxy running at port 3306, and it looks like this is running. So let's see if we refresh the page for not characters 1, but character, if we get the data. Cool. So we're actually connected to PlanetScale. We could write all sorts of whatever queries we wanted. We can use our connection.query here to be able to send that stuff in. And we are pretty good to go. Now we can update this second one to be almost the same. So let's do const query. And then we will do select star from characters where, and then we're going to say that the ID equals ID. And this probably go ahead and capitalize. And then this one will be, we'll do variable interpolation here, and we'll add in the ID. And then we'll say we're going to limit this to 1. Now I'm trying to do variable interpolation, which I think is working well. So we're saying select everything from characters where the ID matches the ID that we're looking for, but limit that thing to 1. So only give me 1 back. So we'll do that query, and then I'm going to change this up a little bit because one of the things I want to see is if nothing comes back, I want to see some information about that. So if I query 1, I'm still responding with this. I don't want that. So let's restart this and refresh, and it looks like we broke something. So let's see what's going on there. Oh, I think we need quotes around the ID. So we'll do the variable interpolation, but still need quotes around it. All right, so let's save that. Let's try to run it again and see. Broke something again. Good. Another syntax error near this bracket because that doesn't go there. You probably already saw these errors and knew what was going on. So, okay, so this is returning good. And then if I return in 0, for example, this shouldn't show me anything. So it should return an empty array. But I want to change the return value a little bit. So I'm going to create a return value and have this be standardized to include both data, which could be empty, and then a message if there's any information about it. So the data in this case is going to be rows.length. If it's greater than 0, then I want it to be the first one, so rows of 0. Otherwise, I want it to be null. So what we're saying here is ternary operator. If there are records inside of this rows array, return the first one. Otherwise, just null. And then this similar thing, if the rows.length equals 0, meaning nothing is in there, we can say no record found. Otherwise, it's okay. We could just do nothing. So instead of just returning rows, let's now return the return val. This is just a little bit of formatting to make sure that we have consistency across the different API endpoints. So now if I refresh, it's to show the no record found inside of the return val. And then this one should show the actual data there and an empty message, which is good. We could have that be null as well. Okay, so then I want to do something similar for the one above that. So this could be const return val equals, and we could have data be rows, and then message, similar thing here. If the rows.length is 0, we could say no records found. Otherwise, we'll return null. So a similar thing, and then we'll return that as well. So let's just check to make sure if we go to this endpoint. So the slash characters, well, we broke it. So there's that. Rows.length equals 0 question mark, no records found. All right, so let's give that another shot. This is the beauty of Nodemon, by the way, that this thing just automatically reloads. So there that is. If I were to change this to say where ID equals hee or something, just to trigger it to return nothing, it's going to say no records found. So that's cool. So we don't actually want that part, so get rid of the where. So we've got our two endpoints to be able to query all of our data. Now this is the basics of setting up an API. So we've got a database, we've got our API endpoints that people can call. We're able to run this thing, we're able to build it with TypeScript. We have all that stuff set up. The next step is to actually get all the information that we want from this Throne of Glass Wiki page into our database. And it's not really that easy because this isn't in a really good format for us. So what I did is I went to the characters page and I just started looking at all of, where is this characters page? If I click on the more characters, now we can see all the characters. So I started looking inside of here for all the characters. And what I did, what we will do if you stick around, is we will web scrape, which means we will just parse all this HTML, grab each of these links, grab each of the names of these characters, and then go to each one of their details page and grab their image, their name, and their species. So just a couple of basic pieces of information. So if you're interested in that, stick around and we'll go ahead and get into the web scraping and portion and seeding our database. All right, so I think this is gonna be pretty cool. I think it's kind of fun. So let's go ahead and create our seed.ts file. So this is gonna be inside of source. This is gonna be seed. .ts. And did we already add the command inside of scripts? We did not. So let's add a command for seed DB. Now seeding in general, if you haven't heard of this before, is just populating your database with some sort of data. So before this API will actually work, we need to get this data over to our database. And the script, we'll just run the node and then we'll run .source / seed.ts. So that will be that command. And actually, I'm gonna, just for dev purposes, I'm gonna run this with Nodemon so I don't have to continue to refresh as we're testing and trying this out. So inside of our TS, have we already installed Axios? Let's check. I think we did. So inside of here, yeah, I think we have all our dependencies. So we're gonna import Axios. That's gonna be for making fetch requests. So we'll import Axios from Axios, import Cheerio from Cheerio. We'll import MySQL again. So we'll get that because we'll need to use it to actually save the data. And that should be close to good. And then we'll also go and copy over this connection stuff with MySQL. So we'll just copy this stuff in and now we can start to work on this. So what I did was, I guess we could do all this together just for testing. But on this characters page, on this one here, notice there's all these different character names. All we really need to get off of this is, if we look at Ansel of Briarcliff, is all we need to grab is this last part. So we need to look at each one of those URLs and then grab that last part. So I've, in the final code, you'll see an array of just that final part. So you could bypass having to make fetch requests to get all these, but I think it's kind of cool anyway. So let's create a function, get character page names. And this will be a function that doesn't take any parameters, but it will be async. So we'll use async await with this. And then let's see, want to get this whole URL here. So let's just copy in this as the URL. So that's the Throne of Glass.fandom.wiki. something. All right, and then from there, we want to make an Axios request to that. So from Axios, we want to destructure the data. And we want to say await Axios.get, and then pass in that URL. So this is going to return to us all of this HTML for this page. And you'll see this here in a second. So let's just log out this data here in a second. So that's saved, but we also need to call the get character page names. The other thing we need to do is stop our actual app. And now we should run npm run seed db. So we'll run our seed db command. Let's see if, the connection string is not running. So we actually need to run this the exact same way that we ran before. So we do our pscale connect, our database name, our branch name, and then execute. And then instead of dev, we are going to run seed db. That way it passes in that database URL directly. And now MySQL thingy should work. And then you see just a bunch of information on the screen. So now Cheerio's response is to allow us to parse through that stuff. So we can get Cheerio. We just kind of reference this as $, I think, because people are used to jQuery. And we'll call Cheerio dot load of the data. All right, so from this data, we want to start by getting a reference to the DOM element that has each of these list items. So this is kind of the boring part of this. You have to look through here, and I'm looking for the UL. And this UL element has a class of category page members for care. And that's what I'm looking to start querying. So we can get this we can say that our categories is going to be, we're going to query. So we're going to take that $, and then pass in an HTML query. So inside of here, we're looking for a UL that has a class of category page __ members for car. Now this is, again, kind of the hacky stuff here, but I think it is fun. With that in place, I'm going to initialize an array of character page names. That's an empty array. And then that's what I'm going to return at the end. So character page names. All right, and then now we need to actually work with that information. So I'm going to use a regular for loop. And the reason I'm using a regular for loop instead of a for each or something like that is because we're going to do asynchronous stuff in here. Actually, we're not doing asynchronous stuff anyway. I forget why I moved this to a for loop. So if you have thoughts and you want to do it differently, let me know in the comments. But I made this decision at some point during this tutorial creation. So we're creating this this basic for loop, and we want to iterate through each one of those categories. And so we'll get the UL for each one of these categories. So, and what happens is for each of these ULs, they will have a nested set of LI elements with the class category page member. And inside of that LI, nested in here is the actual anchor tag link that we're looking for. So we're going to need to parse those a little bit more too. So with that UL, what we can do is we can throw that back into Cheerio. So doing our $, we can throw that into Cheerio and then call find. And find is going to look at its children, and now it's going to find the elements that have LI with a class of category, page, not pager, but page member. All right, and then we're going to assign this to a characters LIs variable. So this will be an array of all of those LI elements for that specific category. And then we want to do a nested for loop. So we do let j equals 0 while j is less than character LIs dot length. So we want to iterate through each one of those LIs. So then j plus plus. And then inside of here, we want to grab the actual LI element from character LIs of I. And then we want to do something similar. We want to say that the name property is going to be, we'll throw that LI into Cheerio. So we'll start with LI and then we'll call find again. And now we're looking for an anchor tag with a class of category page member dash link. So this will give us our anchor tag, but then we can get the specific attribute calling attr of href. So that should give us the actual href that we're looking for. So if we were to log this out, so log out that name, let's see, do we have, I think that will work. So let's see if we say this and refresh, do we see a bunch of names? No, we see something has gone awry here. So let's just initialize this. I think this is a TypeScript thing with a name inside of there. Now we see a bunch of undefined, so not quite what we're looking for. So let's see if we log out the LI elements, if we're actually getting those correctly. So let's not log out name just yet. And it looks like we're getting those correctly. So if we double check the spelling here, underscore page dash dash member dash link, is that correct? So we take our LI and we call find, and we're looking for a dot category underscore. Nope, it's not underscore. It is dash page. That would probably be why. And then let's go, instead of logging out that, let's go and log out the name here. So we save that with refresh. We should see, hopefully, we see a lot of some of these, not all of these. I think one of our, this thing is probably wrong. So this is supposed to be J. All right, now let's see if we're getting close. Now we see all of these slash wiki. So we can say this is going to be the path, and then we can say name equals. We'll take the path and we'll replace slash wiki slash with nothing. Let's see, path, no question mark. So we want to get rid of that /wiki/. And this is saying that we might get back undefined for this path. So just to make sure that we're getting a string, we can say if it doesn't come back with anything, set it to an empty string. And then did we get the end of this? That looks good. Let's see if we get our actual name. So there it is. Those are the names that we're looking for. So then we'll take our character page names and we'll push on each one of these names. That ought to give us all the names that we need as we're going and querying each individual detail. Now, after we have each one of those names, we're going to navigate to the actual page for that character and then grab, like we said, the image, the name, and the species. So to do this, let's go ahead and let's create a couple of extra functions. We're going to create first a load characters. I guess this could also be like a seed function, but we can call this load characters here. And this is going to be another async function. And we're going to start by getting those characters. So we'll say character page names. And we'll get this from calling this get character page names function. And this is async function. So we'll call get character page names function. Now for each one of these, we're going to want to iterate through each one and make a request to their details page. So all these are going to be in this format of throneofglass.fandom.com/wiki/ and in that name. So let's go ahead and we'll do this in a slightly different way here in a second. But let's start with a regular for loop to say I less than character page names dot length increment I. And then inside of here, what do we want to do? Well, we want to call maybe a new function for get character info. So let's go ahead and define that function. Let's move this one to the bottom. All right. And then let's create another function, const get character info. And this is going to be an async function that takes in a parameter character name. And we can define this as a string with TypeScript. All right, and we're not doing typings for all of this stuff. We could do more, so feel free to add more TypeScript typings if you would like to. We're going to call get character info for each one of these by passing in that name. So we will do this by saying character info equals await, and then get character info by the name, which is character page names of I. All right, let's see what is wrong with this. Well, we need to actually call the function. All right, so we got that formatted. So this should get the character info for each one. Now, how do we actually get that character info? Well, this is where we're going to make that request to the API. So let's go and grab this URL. So not the whole thing, but everything leading up to Abraxas. And we'll copy this in and say this is going to be maybe the base URL. And then we'll surround this with quotes. All right. And then we'll go ahead and make a similar request that we did earlier. We'll get the data that comes back from an axios.get. So axios.get. And then we'll pass in the base URL and then add on URL. Lowercase, and then we will add in the variable of character name. So we'll make that request. We'll get that data for each one, and then we want to load that into Cheerio. So we'll do our $sign there, and then we'll call Cheerio.load, and we'll pass in that data. So same thing we did before, where we make a request to get the HTML. We then pass that in a Cheerio, and now we need to go in and grab the details that we're looking for. So these are going to kind of be a little bit gross, but I found them just by looking through the raw HTML. So up here, the different properties that we're looking for are going to have data source properties. So there's one for name and there's one for species. You'll see data source of species. And then how do we get the image? Does this have a data source property as well? it has a class that we can follow. So this pi-image-thumbnail. So it's basically all of the information that we need. So let's first grab the name. And this is going to be, actually, this is going to be a let because we might have to update this. But we'll start with our Cheerio, and then we'll do our query inside of here. So we're looking for a div that has a data source property of full name. All right. So when we query by data source or data properties, we put that inside of brackets, and we say what the value is here. So we're looking for a div with a data source property of full name. And then we're looking inside of that. If we go back, let's come back to the name. And actually, we will need to look at a different character because I remember there being something weird about that one. So they have the full name property here. So I was actually querying by this full name property before, but I think in the updated version, we could actually just query directly for what's inside of this data source property. So this will actually be a little bit different than maybe what the source code is in the final result, but we could just grab this thing and then grab the text property. So it'll look like this. So if we now log out the name, we first need to stop the logging of these names. So we call the character page names, and we get those, and then we should be calling get character info for each one of them. And it looks like we didn't quite do this right, where this is supposed to be base URL. So we have the base URL and then the character name. And let's see if that will actually grab some of these names. It looks like it's not iterating through. So are we calling... Oh, we're not actually calling load characters. That makes sense. So at the start of this, we're going to call load characters. Load characters will call to get the names. Then it will call for each name, get character info. So hopefully we'll see this kind of iterate through. All right. So it looks like it was trying to, and we've got an error that we'll have to look into here. And we're getting a 404. So let's double check that we've got the right path here. Let's say, let's just change this to URL and then add on the character name. All right, that way we can print this thing out. So then let's go inside of here and let's just say this is going to be the URL. And let's log out this URL property. Let's see if we can see what those are. So there's our big long error, unfortunately. All right, and pretty awkward mistake in here. I left this earlier I left name inside of this array to show it to be an array of strings because we hadn't pushed anything to it yet, and it was trying to access the URL of /name, which does not exist, which is why the 404 happened. And actually, I think there's two things we need to change with this in our querying. This is actually an H2 now. I'm changing the way I'd been querying this before, and then grabbing the name. So let's see if that shows some stuff. Cool. So that starts to show us our names. And then we need a few other things. So we need the species. And this is going to come from another query. It's going to be kind of gross, but we'll have div with a data source of species. So we'll have that. And then we'll have inside of that. So it's data source of species. And then inside of that, it will be a div with pi-data-value. Then a class of pi.font. So that's the query that we're running. And then we're calling the text function on that. So let's see if we can log out and see if species is coming through correctly. That actually looks like it's coming through correctly. So that's nice. Cool. And then last one is the image. So we'll say image equals, and we'll have $, $sign, and then our query. And this is going to be image.image thumbnail. And then we grab the actual image itself, and then we're grabbing the attribute of source. So now can we log the image and see if that is working? So this should be a bunch of URLs. Cool, that's working. The other thing we want to do is we can say if name, in case there isn't a name property, we can set that, we can update that to what we get out of this character name. So let's just go down and add a conditional. If there is no name that we got from the details page, then we can go and grab the parts of, actually, no, we don't need to grab the parts. We can just get character name, and then we can call replace where we will replace the underscores with a space. That should do it. So this will say name equals. All right, and then what we can say is character info is an object that has name, species, and image. And that's what we'll return in the end, character info. All right, so when we call load characters, we'll get each one, and we can say character info array is an empty array. And then we'll push on character info array. We'll push the character info. All right. And then at the end of this, let's just log out the character info array. Character info array. So this, what we'll notice, one thing is that this will actually take a long time. So you'll see this will wait, and I don't know how many seconds it will take. I could probably sit here and drink some water while it's waiting. Still waiting. That's because it's making 150 requests or something like that, and they're all running sequentially. So you see the data just came back, but they're all running sequentially. So one way that we can speed this up is to use promise.all. And basically what that means is we call each one of these and get the promise back, and then await all of them to kind of happen in parallel. There's some details. If you're very specific about JavaScript, they will tell you parallel is not the right word to use for this, but more or less this runs in parallel. So inside of our load characters, instead of this array, we're actually going to kind of scratch that for now. And we're going to get character info promises. So we actually need to keep the character page names, and then we're going to create character info promises. And this is where we're going to iterate through the character page names, and we're going to map. So for each one of those names, we are going to transform it in some way. So we're going to say, there's the character name, and then how do we want to transform this thing? Well, we want to call the get character info function with the character name itself. So what this will do, if we spell it correctly, is iterate through each one of these character page names. It will create a new array of promises that get returned from calling get character info. So we have this array of promises, and then we can say that our characters is going to be await promise.all. So we await all of these to come back while they're running in parallel and not sequentially. Go and grab all those, and then that's going to be our characters. So if we did this correctly, we should see, when we log these out, we should see the same results down here, hopefully, but it should be a heck of a lot faster. Maybe a second or two. I should have actually done a time. So that was 3 or 4 seconds versus 15, 20, maybe 30 seconds earlier. I should have showed you the actual time on there, but nonetheless, it was much, much faster. So the last thing we want to do is actually save these things into our database. So we can add a SQL statement here and say this is going to be insert into characters. And then we specify which properties we're setting. So ID, name, species, and image. And then we say our values is going to be basically kind of a question mark here. So then we run our query. So connection.query, and we pass in the SQL, and then we're going to pass in this array of values. And we have to have a couple of different nested levels of arrays for this to work. So I'll come back to what that is in a second. Then we'll define our function, and then we'll say if error, console error, it didn't work. Otherwise, we will say, yay, DB is populated. All right, so these values, where do those come from? Well, these values, we're going to need to transform the characters array. So right now, characters array is an array of objects, and we need to transform that to be an array of arrays with the individual properties inside of them, if that makes sense. So this is just a little bit of format that we have to follow. So we're going to iterate through the characters array, and we're going to map each one to something. So we're going to actually grab the character and its index I there, and then we're going to return an array where the first, the index is going to be the ID for that thing. Then we'll have character.name, that's the second property, character.species, that's the third property, and then character image is the fourth property. So each one of these characters is now going to become an array of properties. So values is an array of arrays with each property inside of it. And then what we submit now to be able to do these multiple updates at one time is an array of arrays, array of arrays of arrays. Is that right? Array of arrays. I don't know. It's kind of a nested growth structure, but that's what we have to do. And you can check out the documentation on the SQL client to figure out how that works. So let's give this a shot. Let's get rid of the log for characters. Let's just save this and see what happens. So if we let this run for a few seconds, it should finish doing all those queries. It says, yay, DB is populated. And then it says, this should actually be an else. Then it says, didn't work also. So that's not right. So I'm assuming we had some sort of error. So let's go and actually log out that error so we could see. So let's save this. Unfortunately, it takes a few seconds for this to run. And then we'll see what's going on. There's all the values that we're looking to add in there. And it says duplicate target. Now, I think this is because we already have, if we look inside of our database, so if we go to our branches and our dev branch, and then go into the schema, or excuse me, the console, and do a select star from characters. I think this is because we already have one with the ID of 1. So we need to remove that. So we can say delete from characters where ID equals 1. Let's see if that works. And then select star from characters. Cool. So there's nothing in there. Now if we run our insert one more time, we'll have to wait a couple seconds for it to load all the data. Hopefully that will now grab all the data, upload it to the database, and be good to go with seeded data. We'll see here in a second. It says, yay, database is populated. If I then do a select star from characters again, hopefully this time we'll see a bunch of data come up. It's cool. So our database is absolutely populated. We can stop this command because we don't want to seed the database anymore. It'll just throw errors. But we've got just kind of a little script in here to be able to do that. And now if we were to run this pscale connect thing again and run the start command, this will start the API. And then now we should see that this API is populated with all of these characters. So if we run this, that's grabbing data from the database. And then we could add in an ID. So there's 0 is Abraxas and 1 is, oh, not double slash, but single slash is Adian Ashriver. Anyway, I think it's kind of cool. So in a recap, we built an API using Node Express and a little bit of TypeScript. We didn't go super TypeScript heavy. We could definitely do more, but we used TypeScript. We built a couple of API endpoints here for getting a list of characters and then getting a character by its ID. We set up our database in PlanetScale. We talked about branches in PlanetScale. We could also, this is actually really interesting. Inside of our branch or inside of our database, we could now do a deploy request. So this is kind of like a pull request would be inside of a GitHub project. So if we look at our branches and look at dev, we could promote this to the production branch. We could also create this deploy request to say, hey, DB is updated. And this will go ahead and create the deploy request, and then someone will need to approve it. So you have like this similar process of a PR in GitHub. Now you can track all that stuff, know who made the updates and so on. So you have the ability to do that. We haven't published this anywhere. If you'd like to see where to publish a Node application, let me know. But then we did our scraping script, our seed TypeScript file, where we scraped all the information and got it in the format that we needed and uploaded it to PlanetScale and had all the stuff connected. I think it was a lot of fun. Hopefully you enjoyed it. This was a longer one. Let me know what kind of tutorial you'd like to see next. Anyway, in the meantime, hope you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you in the next one.